In today's video, I'm checking out endpoint security in Microsoft Intune and Microsoft 365. What are some tips and tricks that you can do to ensure that your endpoint devices are secure? In addition, I'm checking out the latest Microsoft 365 news, so make sure that you stay tuned. If your Microsoft settings change, your configs get deleted, or if you have unchecked users lurking in your tenant, you're asking for trouble. CoreView catches and fixes these issues before they disrupt your business. Visit coreview.com to learn more. Hi there, how are you doing? Andy here, nice to see you. As you can see, I'm not in my office this week. I'm actually in Copenhagen in Denmark teaching a class, and we've been having a conversation today about device security. And I thought, this is something that I've not spoken to you guys about for quite some time. I've done sessions recently on Intune, and you can go and check that out. But today, it's really about how we can ensure that our devices are secure. Now, one of the most common questions that I get asked is, Andy, why do you use a Mac? Again, for me, it just works for me, but it's not really about the device. It's how I can consume my data in a secure way. But as well as securing the data, we also need to feel trust with the device that it's behaving in a correct way and it's not doing some strange things. So today we're going to look at device security in Microsoft Intune, as well as things like conditional access, all designed to help you secure your device and ensure obviously things like zero trust. Now, just a quick mention that if you haven't subscribed to the channel, we'd love for you to come on board. So bump that subscribe button up there, ring the bell, and come and join my learning community. And if you've got questions and comments, you know what to do, get those down below. And if you'd like more, then why not consider signing up to my Patreon channel? My Patreon site contains full courses, and we'll do monthly Zoom calls, and again, you can ask your questions anytime that you want. Okay, so I think without any further ado, let's jump in and take a look at some tips and tricks that can help secure your endpoint devices. Here we go. Okay, let's have a look at some settings, things that you can do that will make a real difference when it comes to security in Microsoft 365, Endpoint, and using conditional access. So first up, I'm going to come into Microsoft Intune from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. And I'm just going to say, no, I don't want to stay signed in because that's not a good security thing, because we don't want token theft. So I'm going to come into Intune. I'm going to come into my devices. In your devices here, obviously, once you've onboarded your devices, which I covered in a recent video, and if you've not seen that, check that out here, by the way. But once you've onboarded your devices, of course, we need to start think about security. And security can be found here in the endpoint security section here. So when we talk about device security, of course, we're talking about different types of devices. So what kind of devices do you have? Windows, Android, Apple devices, MacBooks, and so on. So what we have is we can now manage some of the various tools that we have here. So of course, one of the most important things for an organization is to make sure that you have some kind of security baseline. And a security baseline is exactly that. It's a minimum set of security requirements. Now, Microsoft, as you can see, they have a number of kind of baseline settings. Let me just kind of zoom in there and make that a little bit easier for you to see. So we've got things like you can set up a baseline for Microsoft Edge, which is all fine if you're just using Microsoft Edge. You've got things like what's the Microsoft 365 security baseline. You can go in, you can have a look at these. These are kind of profiles. You can say, right, I want to go ahead and I want to create a policy. So again, tells you a little bit about this template. So I'll just say, yep, I want to go ahead and I want to create this policy. I can give this policy a name. Now this week I'm actually in Copenhagen, so I'm just going to call this my CPH policy. I'll call it CPH policy 1. And again, I can copy that and I can put in a little description. So you can see this platform is specifically for Windows, of course, and that's the key thing. Of course, Windows has already got Microsoft Defender already embedded into the platform. So it's at this point we can now say, okay, which baseline settings do you want to enable? Now, there are a number of default templates that you can use. Do you want to enable auditing, things like data protection, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint? Do you want to switch on device guard, of course, device lock, DMA guard, memory guard? Do you want to enable the experience? Are there any firewall rules that you want to set up? I'm sure you get the idea. So, for example, I'm going to come down here into data protection, and it says things like allow direct memory access. And you can see this one's already enabled, actually. If I go into auditing, you can see this one's already set up. So it's configured with these default settings. So if I go into device guard, you can see it's not supporting things like unmanaged devices. Again, things like, do you want to set up local security policy? Things like enabling UEFI for enhanced security. What about things like privacy? So you can see these are all actually configured and set up. Okay. Now, of course, these are just recommendations that Microsoft give you. But what you can do, of course, is you can go in and you can reconfigure and you can change any of those settings. So once you've gone through that, remember this is the default settings. This is going to be your baseline settings. So again, if you're putting any scope tags, this is quite useful for searching. I can pop that in. And at this point, it's saying, do you want to go ahead and do you want to include this or exclude it from any particular groups? It says, do you want to include all users? I'm always a bit dubious of that, because if you include all, you might find yourself with some major restrictions. So always test it first. So I would just say, avoid all users, test it with different user groups just to be sure. Okay, so we get a nice review, and again, off it goes, and it creates that baseline security policy. So along with that baseline security policy, if I go back to endpoint security, as well as that baseline, you can also go into things like, do you want to add any security tasks? Are there any security tasks here? So again, you can, if there's any admin tasks that you want to put in this case, I'm going to say no, so that's fine. And then here, of course, one of the nice things that Microsoft 365 provides is antivirus. Now, Microsoft use 9 different scanning engines, and to be honest, it does a pretty good job. But again, you can configure this as well. Now, to be fair, to get the most out of all of these settings, probably what you want to do is you want to deploy the Intune client, or the agent rather, I should say. So this can be found actually in a number of places. If I go into security, I'm going to go into the security portal, and if I scroll right down to the bottom of the portal, and what you're looking for is you're looking for the settings. And you can see here, if I scroll down, you've got the system option here, the little gear icon, and we have the settings page here. So with the settings page, if I click into this, sure enough, you can see that we have got something called endpoints. And it's in here that you can, this is how you can control Defender for Endpoint if you've got the license for it, of course. But the fact is, you've already got the license for Intune, so of course you've got the license for Endpoint as well. So you can find the Endpoint client by scrolling down, and you can see it talks about the device management. So with the onboarding here, this is super easy, by the way. You can choose whatever platform that you're using, and it will then create like this nice little onboarding script, and you can then install it. If you're on premises, it will give you the settings for group policy, config manager, whatever platform that you're using. Download the package, and then you can push that out to your users. Of course, there's also a little script here. So once you've downloaded that, if you just run this little PowerShell command, and that just checks that everything's there, everything's woken up, and everything's working. Okay. Of course, at the end of life, you can also offboard that device as well. So that's the key thing. You can deploy this. You can also deploy this in Intune as well. Once you've deployed that agent, all of these things like Defender for Endpoint, all this will start to light up and it will start monitoring these devices. So what else do we have here? Well, of course, you've got antivirus. You can basically, it will look for any unhealthy devices. So if there's any devices that are not configured correctly or there's missing updates, this can be useful. Disk encryption. So BitLocker, of course, is a favorite in Windows. So I can say, hey, I want to choose Windows and I want to configure BitLocker. You can choose whether BitLocker can be for personal data encryption or BitLocker. EFS, by the way, is the encryption here. So I'm going to go for BitLocker, and again, I can give it a little name, so CPH, and I can just call it my BitLocker policy, and I'll say next. And again, I now get those BitLocker options. So BitLocker, of course, do you require device encryptions? I could say yes, I want to enable. Allow a warning. I'm not going to bother with that. Do you want to allow standard user encryption? I could switch that on. BitLocker drive encryption. So does the user, are they allowed to encrypt things like USB drives and things like that? Again, you can provide an identifier. I won't bother with things like that. Do I want to encrypt the operating system drive? So again, I'm going to enable that. Do you want any kind of additional authentication? So, you might say, yeah, I want to enable things like MFA, allow BitLocker without a TPM module. So a TPM module, what that does is it ensures that any secrets, any, kind of recovery keys are stored on the TPM and never leak into memory. So you can have this option here. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these settings, but needless to say, once you've gone through that, I want to enable BitLocker. Again, you've got the same scope tags. Who do I want to assign this to? So again, in terms of my groups, I'll just go in. I'll say, this time I want this to go to my, let's say, my leadership team here, because they've got laptops, very important. I'm going to assign it to them. I get a nice review, and I now know that any devices that are deployed in Intune will now be secured in BitLocker. Other things that we've got here, you've got firewall settings here as well. So again, if you want to enable any additional client-side firewall rules, you can switch that on here. And then you've got things like privilege management, endpoint privilege management. And there's some nice reporting tools here. So if there's any kind of elevations, what that means is any users who have elevated privileges, maybe to run an application or install something that perhaps they shouldn't, that can be really, really useful. Then you've got things like endpoint detection and response. So this is kind of next generation rules. And again, this is where you can connect to Defender for Endpoint. And what this is looking for, it uses AI and machine learning to obviously detect any potential maliciousness, shall we say. You can see here whether that endpoint client has actually been installed here and there it's working. You've also got things like app control. So if you want to create any policies that restrict any specific apps, you can enable that here. And I love this. This is the attack surface rules. So of course, you can create a policy. Again, we choose Windows. In this case, are you using on-premises with Config Manager? In this case, I'm not. I'm using in the cloud. And again, you've got things like what type of attack surface rules. Do you want to put in things like exploit protection? So protect your system, protect your applications. In this case, I might say I want to reduce the attack surface rules. So I click on continue. And again, I'll just call this my CPH AR. 01, attack rules 01. And again, here you've got, again, some configuration settings. So things like blocking certain types of applications, blocking execution of potentially obfuscated apps, Win32 apps from running macros. You see what I mean? So you can go through, some of this could potentially damage your system. But again, as a security person, I suppose you have to balance security against operational use here. So again, this is kind of, what's convenient as opposed to what's secure. So block Office applications from creating executable content. So again, that's maybe one that you maybe want to set up a warning for rather than enforce it. And you can add the specific application here. Block the use of copied impersonated system tools. Yes, absolutely, block that. I'm sure you get the idea. So these are what we call attack surface rules. So closing down ports, shutting down services, all designed to really restrict the potential for a hacker to do damage. Okay, so then of course we assign it to a particular group again. In this case, I'm going to assign this to my friendly leadership group. Click on next, and again we do a review and finish here. Like I said, again, you've got things like conditional access. I'll cover that actually in a moment. But you can see you've got things like device compliance, user account protection, and then you've also got things like the Defender for Endpoint. So once this client is actually enabled, all of this will then start to light up, which means all of your devices, you're controlling it from this portal. So it's kind of a single pane of glass security solution. So as I've mentioned, those are some of the security features, and definitely take a look at some of these. They can make a real difference at enforcing security here. So again, once you've done that, of course, save those changes. And now what we'll do is let's have a look now at conditional access. Okay, so just very quickly, I just want to mention some important conditional access settings. So I'm here in Entra ID and I'm scrolling down and I'm going to come into conditional access. Now you'll have noticed conditional access was also listed in the Intune portal. And again, Andy, is there one over the other? Should I do it there or do it here? To be honest, it doesn't matter. They're both connected anyway. So as I've mentioned, just good tips and advice for devices. I would definitely create some kind of terms of use here so that you've maybe got an acceptable usage policy, especially if it's like a corporate device. That's quite important. Other things that we've got, you might want to set up an authentication strength. So again, are you going to choose passwordless authentication? And so on. Now, if you've not seen these before, then check out my video on things like multi-factor authentication and authentication strength. You'll find these, by the way, in my Entra ID playlist. So take a look at those. In terms of creating policies, you can create simple policies by coming in, either create a manual policy or you can create a policy from a template here. I'm going to go ahead. I've got, in fact, I've create a policy that I've created before. We can have a look at this one here. Again, I've done dedicated videos on how to create conditional access, but just in case you haven't had a look at these for some time, just a couple of things just to note. If I come down here and you basically, I'm saying here, target resources, I've got specific users groups. So for example, in this case, the Oslo sales group. And I'm going to say if the Oslo sales group are using, for example, all resources or all cloud apps, then they need to meet these specific conditions. If you've got a P2 license or EMNS license, E5, of course, you can set up risk-based conditional access. And this is great because, typically hackers target risky users, so sensitive users. So you might want to kind of monitor that. Beyond that, this is what I'm talking about here when we talk about devices. So device platforms here, what device do you want to include? So Android, iOS, we could travel back to the 90s and use a Windows phone. I always loved that one. Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. So you can exclude specific device platforms here. The other one is the client apps. So again, if I click in, I'm just saying I want browser-based and mobile apps here. So browser-based and mobile apps. And then I can choose things like filter for devices. And this is brilliant. So with conditional access, what we've done is we've said only these users using these device platforms. But in here, when you onboard devices in Intune, you need the device ID, yes? And this will deploy Intune. And if you haven't seen that deployment video, check out last week or a couple of weeks ago, I did a video with Microsoft Autopilot that will explain it. But in here, you can see include these filtered devices. And this is great because you can do in if and or. So I can even say, if the manufacturer, let's say, equals Dell, and I can then say, and if the model, let's say, contains XPS, and I can then say if it's a corporate device, so is owned, where is that? So is compliant. So device ownership, let's say, equals, and it's a company device, and or expression, and you could even really make this granular. Check it out. So you can say, not just the device ownership, but things like the device ID. So the device ID basically contains in this particular format, or contains this, or equals this. So in other words, only these types of devices, only with these device IDs can actually connect. So if anybody tries to do things like a token replay attack, again, this would really thwart that. So I think this is a great feature, so definitely check that out. On the subject of token replay attack, so based on those conditions, you could say, yeah, I'm going to grant access, but I require either multi-factor authentication or an authentication strength, for example, passwordless authentication. Once they've signed in, you can then control the session, of course. So with session controls, I can say, I might want the user to re-authenticate every time they log in. You could be a financial institution. It could be very sensitive. So again, that is really good. And the other thing that we've got is token protection. Now, the reason why this is not working here is because I've chosen all cloud apps. This only works with a specific, for example, the Microsoft 365 app or an administrator portal or something like that. But in terms of using this is a great feature. That's what we talk about conditional access policy when it comes to devices. Now, what else can we talk about? Well, I'd like to bring your attention to a brand new feature in Entra ID. So if I'm just going to scroll in here, and we have this new feature here called certificate authorities. And although here I can't manage it, if you look over here to access the new portal. So again, you can also do this in Intune as well, but we now have the capabilities to create our own digital certificate environment. So what do I want to call the display name? In this case, I'll just call it Contoso. I'll click next. And we've now created our PKI infrastructure. So in here, I'm now going to go in. And again, I can say, right, what do I want to do? I might want to add a certificate authority. So who is the authority? So again, I can either browse for a digital certificate here, or you can, of course, create one. So is this certificate the root? Or again, you can put that certificate details in here and you can add that certificate authority there. Any certificates that you've deleted will obviously appear in here as well. Now there is a little bit more. You can also come into Intune, and if you've got a license for the Intune suite, then you'll definitely want to take advantage of this. If I go into the tenant administration portal in Intune, you can see that in here we also have, it's the Cloud PKI service here, and again I can create a certificate. And again, I'll say this one is my, in fact, I'll call this one a datum. Okay. You can put in a little description, and I can put in the configuration settings. So what kind of certificate is this? Is it root or an issuing CA? I'm going to say it's the root CA, and you can choose the validity period. Again, you know, I'm going to choose 10 years for this one. What's the intended key usage? So I'm using it, for example, for client authentication, IPsec, for example. Are you using smart card logon? And this is one of the big excuses why companies never move to the cloud. Or are you using it to confirm a MAC address? For this detail, for this purpose, I'm going to choose client authentication. And again, in here, I can say what's the intended usage. I can choose things like email protection. And again, you can see you can choose all of those things. Now it says, okay, what are the subject attributes? So what's the common name? So again, I'm saying Contoso. And what's the organization? I could say sales. What's the organizational unit? I could say, let's say Oslo, and the country would be NO for Norway. Okay. In this case, if I just say Norway, and what state or province? Again, Oslo. Locality. Again, you could, again, this is going to differ from country to country. Then we can choose an encryption. So again, in terms of the encryption, you want to choose the strongest encryption possible. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to do RSA SHA-512, SHA-3. So again, you just get a nice review, and then I'm just going to go ahead and I can create that. And that now gives me the Cloud PKI, and I can now distribute those digital certificates to my users. Okay, so that, gentlemen and ladies, is just a very quick way in how to secure security and certificates in Intune and Entra ID with a little bit of configuration. Now, just before I go, I've got a little bit of news that I just want to share with you. Now, a few weeks ago, I was talking about changing the source of authority on group memberships. So if you've got Entra ID Connect and you're syncing objects into Entra ID, what we now have is the capability to actually go to those objects in Entra ID and change the source of authority so that they're now in the cloud. Well, in the demo that I showed, I did it for groups. Now you can do it through users. And not only with the users, but we can also see here in the slide, but pretty soon it's not just going to be through PowerShell. You're actually going to be able to do this in Entra ID Connect as well. So watch out for this very soon as this feature is being rolled out. And I'm going to do a dedicated session on that. But that is definitely some important news worth knowing. So there you have it, securing your endpoint devices in both Microsoft Intune and conditional access. Some really useful and important tips there, by the way. If you've got questions, as always, I'd love those. Get those down below and I'll always do my best for you. That's it for this week. I'll see you next time around. Do take care. Thanks.